400 guests, crystal chandeliers, a bride in white lace. Everything about this wedding was perfect. Until the groom picked up the microphone. "Before I tell you how much I love my bride," he said, "I need to tell you about the night my father left my mother to die." The room went silent. 400 people stopped breathing. 25 years ago, a billionaire walked out on his pregnant wife. She was 8 months along, bleeding on the bathroom floor. She called him 3 times. He never answered. He was in a hotel room with his mistress. That baby survived. That baby grew up. And tonight, that baby is standing at the altar in a tailored suit, holding a champagne glass steady in his hand, looking his father dead in the eyes. What happened next destroyed a billionaire's legacy in front of every person he ever tried to impress. But here's what no one expected. This speech was not about revenge. It was about something far more powerful. Stay with me. Every satisfying word of this story is worth your time. Value statement. This story carries a truth that every woman deserves to hear. Your worth is never measured by who chose to leave. It is measured by how you chose to rise. Abandonment does not define you. What you build from the ashes does. If this story touched something real inside you, leave a comment and tell me. Which moment hit you the hardest? I read every single comment. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message tonight, share this video with them. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. We pour our hearts into every single one.
The champagne glass caught the light from 400 candles. Crystal chandeliers hung above like frozen rain. A string quartet played something soft and forgettable in the corner of the Grand Belmont Hotel ballroom. 400 guests sat at round tables draped in ivory linen, their dessert plates half finished, their conversations humming like bees in a garden. Callum Whitfield stood up. He was 25 years old, tall, dark hair cut short, a jaw that could have belonged to his father, though he would never admit it. His tuxedo was rented, not tailored. His shoes were polished but not new. The boutonniere, pinned to his lapel, was a single gardenia, white, perfect, the same flower his mother used to grow on the balcony of a penthouse she would never return to. Beside him, his bride Darcy squeezed his knee under the tablecloth. One firm press. She knew what was coming. They had planned this together, night after night, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their apartment, rehearsing the words until they sounded like breathing. Callum tapped the microphone. The room quieted. Forks settled against plates. Conversations trailed off like smoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," Callum said. His voice was steady, warm, even. The kind of voice you trust before you understand why. "Before I tell you how much I love my bride, I need to tell you about the night my father left my mother to die." The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of 400 people forgetting how to breathe. At table 3, Garrett Whitfield set down his whiskey glass. Not at the family table, table 3. He had noticed the seating assignment when the place cards were laid out. His wife Sloane had noticed too, her smile tightening like a wire pulled taut. But Garrett had told himself it was an oversight. His son was getting married. The past was the past. He had even brought a gift, a Rolex, engraved on the back. "To my son, G.W." The Rolex sat in his jacket pocket now, ticking against his ribs. Callum continued. 25 years ago, on a Tuesday night in November, my mother called my father from the bathroom floor of their penthouse apartment. She was 8 months pregnant, with me. She was hemorrhaging, bleeding so badly the bathwater turned red. A woman at table 7 pressed her hand to her mouth. Her husband reached for her arm. She called him 3 times. 3 times. The phone rang and rang. He did not answer. Callum paused. Let the silence do its work. He was at the Four Seasons Hotel, room 1112, with the woman who is now sitting beside him at table 3. Every head in the room turned, not quickly. Slowly. The way sunflowers follow the sun, 400 pairs of eyes found Sloane Prescott Whitfield, who sat in a dove-gray dress with her hands folded in her lap. The color drained from her face like water from a cracked glass. Garrett half rose from his chair. His napkin slid to the floor. Then he sat back down. Because what was he going to do? Walk out. In front of everyone, every business partner, every society columnist, every person who had ever shaken his hand and called him a great man. The trap was perfect. And Callum had not even raised his voice. Callum's hand trembled, just slightly. The champagne rippled in the glass. Darcy's fingers found his knee again and pressed. Once, steady, he breathed. But that was not the worst part, Callum said. He looked directly at his father for the first time, not with anger, not yet. With something worse, with calm. The worst part is what he did the next morning. The string quartet sat with their instruments in their laps. The waiters had stopped pouring wine. The cake stood untouched on its pedestal, white and towering and innocent. And Callum Whitfield, the groom, the son, the boy who was never supposed to survive, opened his mouth and began to tell the truth. The story he told did not begin with him. It began with his mother. It began with a woman named Noel. Noel Carver married Garrett Whitfield on a Saturday in June when she was 23 years old. She wore her grandmother's veil. He wore a smile that made her believe every promise he whispered against her hair during the first dance. They moved into the penthouse on the 32nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a balcony where Noel planted gardenias and terracotta pots because her mother had always said gardenias meant secret love. Garrett walked past those gardenias every single day for 3 years. He never once asked what they were. By the time Noel was 26, she was 8 months pregnant and something was wrong, not with the baby, with the silences. Garrett came home later, smiled less, touched her only when other people were watching. She told herself it was the merger, the board meetings, the pressure of building an empire. She wrote in her diary on a Thursday night in September. I asked him directly, "Are you seeing someone?" He laughed. Actually laughed. Called me hormonal. Maybe I am. Maybe pregnancy brain is real and I am imagining things. But I know what I saw. She did not imagine things. On the night of November 17th, Noel was alone in the penthouse. She had made dinner, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, Garrett's favorite. The food sat on the counter getting cold. She called him at 7. No answer. 8. No answer. 9. Voicemail. At 9:42, she felt it. A gush of warmth between her legs. She looked down. The kitchen tile was red. Bright red. The kind of red that does not belong inside a home. She pressed both hands against her belly. The baby kicked. Hard. Like he was trying to tell her something. She crawled to the phone on the wall. Her fingers were slippery. She dialed Garrett's number. It rang 4 times. Voicemail. She dialed again. Voicemail. She dialed a 3rd time. This time, someone answered. But it was not Garrett. The voice was female. Breathy. Annoyed. Like someone interrupted in the middle of something pleasant. He is in the shower, the voice said. Call back tomorrow. Click. Noel stared at the phone in her hand. Blood pooled beneath her. The tile was warm and wet. The gardenias on the balcony swayed in the November wind, and she could smell them through the cracked door. Sweet, almost sickeningly sweet. She knew. In that moment, lying on the kitchen floor of her own home, 8 months pregnant and bleeding, she knew everything she had been pretending not to know. But she could not fall apart. Not yet. The baby was coming. The baby was coming too fast and too early, and there was too much blood. She dialed 911, gave the address. Her voice was calm. The operator later said she sounded like someone reading a grocery list. 29 West Lexington, penthouse. I am pregnant. I am bleeding. Please hurry. She passed out before the paramedics arrived. At the Four Seasons Hotel, room 1112, Garrett Whitfield stepped out of the shower. Steam clung to the mirror. The sheets were tangled. Sloane Prescott lay on the bed, scrolling through his phone. Your wife called 3 times, she said. No concern in her voice, annoyance. The kind of annoyance reserved for mosquitoes and alarm clocks. Garrett glanced at the phone. 3 missed calls from Noel. He hesitated. For 1 second, something that might have been guilt flickered across his face. Then it passed. She is probably just being dramatic, he said. She has been emotional all month. The pregnancy hormones. He set the phone face down on the nightstand. He ordered room service. 2 glasses of champagne, 1 for him. 1 for the woman who was not his wife. The champagne arrived at 10:03. At 10:18, 7 miles away, a baby boy was delivered by emergency cesarean section. He weighed 4 pounds, 11 ounces. He was not breathing. Dr. Ruth Callaway, a young attending on her first solo emergency shift, worked on the baby for 3 minutes before he gasped. A tiny, furious sound, like a door opening into a room that had been locked too long. Noel flatlined on the operating table, twice. Dr. Callaway worked for 47 minutes. Her hands did not shake. Later, in the locker room, they would, but not during, not when it mattered. Both survived. The mother, the son, barely. The hospital called Garrett's phone 6 times between 10:30 and midnight. He did not answer. He was asleep, Sloane's head on his chest, the champagne glasses empty on the nightstand. He finally answered at 6 in the morning. A nurse, her voice tight with the kind of professionalism that masks fury. Mr. Whitfield, your wife was admitted last night with a placental abruption. She underwent emergency surgery. Your son is in the NICU. Silence. Is she stable? Garrett asked. She is stable. Good. I will come by this afternoon. I have a morning meeting. He hung up. The nurse stood in the hospital corridor holding the phone. She looked at it for a long time. Then she walked into Noel's room, where the machines beeped and the IV dripped, and a woman who was 26 years old lay alone in a bed that smelled like antiseptic and gardenias. Someone had brought flowers. Not Garrett. A neighbor. Mrs. Fenton from the building, 81 years old. She had hobbled to the hospital with a paper bag of gardenia clippings from Noel's own balcony. Noel's eyes were closed. Her hand rested on her belly, now hollow, still searching for the baby who was 3 floors away, fighting for air. She had trusted him. She had called him first. Not 911, him. Because that is what wives do. That is what love does. It makes you reach for the person who promised to be there, even when your body is telling you there is no time. Those 3 phone calls cost her 8 minutes. 8 minutes of blood loss. 8 minutes of damage to a heart that was already breaking. She would never fully recover. At 2:17 that afternoon, Margot Carver arrived. She had driven 3 hours from Woodhaven after getting the call from the hospital. She was 28 years old, single, a second-grade teacher who made $31,000 a year and drove a car with a dent in the passenger door that she could not afford to fix. She walked into the room and found her sister alone. No flowers from a husband, no cards, no stuffed animals for the baby, just machines and silence and the slow drip of medication. Margot sat down. She took Noel's hand. Where is he? She asked. Noel opened her eyes. They were flat, empty, like windows in a house where nobody lives. He had a morning meeting, Noel said. Margot's jaw tightened. She squeezed her sister's hand. She said nothing for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. The IV beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Finally, Margot spoke. "I am not leaving," she said. "Not until he shows up, and when he does, God help him." Garrett arrived at the hospital at 4:15 in the afternoon, 18 hours after his wife nearly died. He was wearing a fresh suit, his hair was combed, he smelled like cologne and coffee. He walked into Noel's room the way he walked into board meetings. Shoulders back, chin lifted. A man who owned every room he entered. But he was not alone. Behind him stood a man in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase. Thin, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of man who speaks in clauses. Garrett's lawyer. Margot stood up from the chair beside Noel's bed. She looked at the lawyer, then at Garrett, then at the envelope in the lawyer's hand. "What is this?" she said. Garrett did not answer her. He walked to Noel's bedside. His eyes moved over the tubes, the monitors, the pallor of her skin. He did not touch her. "Noel," he said. His voice was measured, rehearsed. "I have been thinking about this for a while. We both know this has not been working." He placed the envelope on the edge of her hospital bed. The paper was crisp, white. Inside were separation papers, already drafted, already notarized, dated 2 weeks before the hemorrhage. He had been planning this before the emergency. The emergency did not change his mind. It accelerated his timeline. Noel stared at the envelope, then at Garrett, then at the machines that were keeping her alive. Her hand moved to her abdomen. The incision was held together with staples. Their son was in the neonatal intensive care unit 3 floors above, breathing through a tube. "You brought a lawyer," she whispered. "To the hospital, while our son is fighting to breathe." Garrett straightened his cufflinks. "I thought it was better to be honest with you. Sloan and I want a fresh start. I think it is better for everyone if the baby stays with you." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. No custody, no visitation, no weekends, no birthdays, no first steps, no first words, clean break. That was the phrase the lawyer used. Clean break, as if you could break a family cleanly, as if there would be no jagged edges, no shrapnel, no scars. Margot listened for exactly 30 seconds. She counted them. Later, she would tell Callum that she counted because if she had not been counting, she would have done something that would have landed her in a jail cell. At the 31st second, she spoke. "Get out," she said. Her voice was low, steady, the voice of a woman who teaches second graders and knows exactly how to make a room go quiet. "Get out of this room before I call security and every reporter in this city." Garrett looked at her, looked at Noel, adjusted his tie. "I will have my attorney send the rest of the paperwork," he said, and he left, calmly, unhurried, like a man leaving a business meeting that ran 10 minutes long. The door closed behind him. The sound was soft, final. Margot sat down. Neither sister spoke. The machines beeped, the clock ticked. Somewhere above them, in the neonatal unit, a baby boy with dark hair and his mother's chin was breathing on his own for the first time. A nurse came in with an update. "He is off the ventilator," she said. "He is doing well." Noel nodded. A single tear slid down her temple and disappeared into her hair. "He brought a lawyer, Margot," she whispered. "To the hospital. Our son is fighting to breathe, and he brought a lawyer." Margot held her sister's hand and said nothing. Because there are moments when words are not just inadequate, they are an insult to the silence. The financial devastation came next. Quiet, methodical, like someone dismantling a house one nail at a time. Garrett had been moving assets for months. The penthouse was in his name only. Noel had never thought to check. Why would she? She trusted him. The joint accounts had been drained to their minimums. Her credit cards were canceled. And the insurance. God. The insurance. Garrett had begun the paperwork to remove Noel from his company health plan. The cancellation was backdated. which meant the emergency cesarean section, the NICU stay, the blood transfusions, the cardiac monitoring, all of it. None of it was covered. The bill arrived 3 weeks later. $187,000 for a billionaire's wife who now had nothing. Margot found her sister sitting up in bed, staring at the bill. Just staring, like she was trying to read a document written in a language she had never learned. $187,000, Noel said. He makes that in a day, less than a day, and he left me with this. Margot took the bill, folded it, put it in her purse. We will figure it out, she said. She did not know how. She made $31,000 a year. She had $800 in savings. But she said, we will figure it out, because that is what you say when someone you love is drowning and you cannot swim either. Noel came home from the hospital after 19 days, but she did not go home to the penthouse. Garrett had changed the locks. Her clothes arrived in cardboard boxes, delivered by a courier who would not meet her eyes. She moved into Margot's apartment in Woodhaven, 2 bedrooms above a dry cleaner. The smell of steam and chemicals rose through the floorboards. The radiator clanked at night like someone knocking to be let in. The baby slept in a second-hand crib that Margot bought from a woman at church. It had a scratch on one side and a mobile of faded stars that played a tinkling version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Noel named him Callum. She chose the name herself. It meant dove, peace, something gentle in the middle of wreckage. She gave him Garrett's last name, Whitfield, not out of love for his father, out of defiance. That name belonged to her son as much as it belonged to the man who abandoned him. Maybe more. For 3 years, Noel lived. She lived carefully, the way you walk across ice, testing each step. Her heart had been permanently damaged. Postpartum cardiomyopathy, the doctors said. The muscle was weakened beyond repair. She would need medication for the rest of her life. She would tire easily. She would not run or climb stairs without stopping to breathe. But she had 3 years. 3 years of holding Callum, teaching him to clap, watching him take his first steps in the narrow hallway of Margot's apartment, his chubby hands gripping the walls, laughing each time he fell. She wrote letters to him, long letters, sealed them in envelopes, gave them to Dr. Ruth Callaway, the doctor who had saved both their lives, with instructions. Give them to him when he is old enough. She knew, she could feel it, the way you can feel a storm coming before the sky changes color. Her heart was not getting better. It was counting down. Noel Whitfield died on a Wednesday morning in March. She was 29 years old. Callum was 3. He was sitting in her lap when it happened. She was reading him a story. Good night, Moon. She made it to the page with the quiet old lady whispering hush, and then she was gone. Margot found them. Callum was still sitting in his mother's lap. He was not crying. He was patting Noel's hand. Wake up, Mama. Wake up. Garrett Whitfield did not attend the funeral. He sent a wreath, no card. In the present, 400 wedding guests sat in silence. Callum held the microphone. His voice had not wavered, not once. I did not grow up in my father's mansion, he said. I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner in Woodhaven. My Aunt Margot raised me. He pointed to a woman at the family table. She was 56 years old. Her dress was navy blue. She had altered it 3 times to make it fit right, because buying a new one was not an option. Her hands were pressed flat against the tablecloth. Her eyes were bright with tears she was refusing to let fall. She was 28 years old, Callum said, single, a second-grade teacher making $31,000 a year, and she took in her sister's baby without a moment of hesitation. Margot shook her head. Not a denial, a reflex. The way you shake your head when someone gives you credit for something you never considered optional. She worked 2 jobs for the first 5 years of my life, Callum continued. Teaching by day, waitressing by night. A woman named Mrs. Fenton from our building watched me in the evenings. She was 81 years old, and she charged nothing. When Margot tried to pay her, Mrs. Fenton said, "That is what decent people do." The room was so quiet, you could hear the candles breathing. He told them about growing up, about being 6 years old and asking Margot why he did not have a daddy. Her answer, steady and sure despite the crack in her voice, "You have me, and I am enough." Then crying in the shower afterward, where he could not hear, about being 8 and finding a newspaper clipping in Margot's dresser. A society page photograph. Garrett Whitfield at a charity gala, tuxedo pressed, sharp as a blade, his arm around a blonde woman Callum did not recognize. Beside them stood a toddler in a miniature suit, another boy, about Callum's age. He stared at the photo for a long time. He did not understand it yet, but he kept it, folded it into a square, and tucked it inside his pillowcase. About being 10 and sitting alone at career day, while all the other kids' fathers stood beside them. Tucker Brennan's dad, a plumber with hands the size of dinner plates, spotted Callum in the corner and walked straight over. "Come on, buddy," he said. "You are with us today." Tucker, a freckled boy with a gap-toothed grin, handed Callum half his sandwich without being asked. They became inseparable that day. They never talked about why. About being 12 and writing a letter. This was the part that made the room hold its breath. Callum, age 12, found Garrett's office address in a business magazine at the public library. He sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter on lined notebook paper. It was a school assignment. Write a letter to someone important in your life. He wrote one sentence. "Dear Dad, why did you not want me?" He addressed the envelope carefully. He walked 6 blocks to the post office. He used his allowance to buy a stamp. Margot gave him $2 a week for taking out the trash and feeding the neighbor's cat. The stamp cost 55 cents. 2 weeks later, the letter came back, unopened, stamped in red ink across the front. Return to sender. Callum took the letter to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed. He held it in both hands and stared at those 3 words. Return to sender, as if he were a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. He did not cry. He was 12 years old, and he had already learned that crying did not bring people back. He put the letter in a shoebox under his bed. He kept it for 13 years. He would bring it to his wedding. Margot watched him grow. She watched the quiet intensity that settled into him like sediment at the bottom of a river. He was not an angry child. He was a focused one. He did his homework before she asked. He read books that were 3 grades above his level. He never asked for things they could not afford. But she saw the moments he thought she did not see. She saw him standing in front of the bathroom mirror at age 9, turning his head side to side, looking for his father in his own face. She saw him at age 11, watching a father-son commercial on television, his expression so still it looked like a photograph. She saw him at the kitchen table one night, 14 years old, doing math homework. He looked up and said, "Aunt Margot, did my dad kill my mom?" The pencil in her hand stopped. She set it down carefully. She looked at him. His eyes were dark and steady. Not accusing, searching. "No, baby," she said. "He did not kill her, but he broke her heart so badly that her heart could not heal." He nodded, went back to his homework, and Margot went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub and pressed her face into a towel and cried, silently, because she had made a promise to herself the day she carried Callum out of that hospital. She would cry in private, She would be strong in daylight. She would give this boy a life that his mother would have been proud of, even if it meant giving up her own. She never married. She never traveled. She never bought a new car. Every dollar went to Callum. Every hour went to Callum. Every prayer, every worry, every sleepless night. Years later, at the wedding, when Callum said her name into the microphone, Margot would cover her mouth with both hands. Not because she was surprised, because she had spent 25 years making sure this boy survived, and hearing him say it out loud was like hearing a doctor say the surgery was successful. Relief so deep, it felt like pain. She sat at the family table in her altered navy dress, and she thought, Noel, your boy turned out just fine. Late that night, long after Callum had gone to bed, Margot sat at the kitchen table. She spread the bills out like a hand of cards she could not win. Rent, electricity, Callum's school supplies, groceries, the medical debt from Noel's hospital stay, which she had taken on because who else was going to pay it? She added numbers, subtracted, erased, recalculated. The math never worked. It was never going to work. But she did it anyway, because doing the math was better than admitting she was drowning. She put her head down on the table, just for 1 minute, just to feel the cool wood against her forehead, just to close her eyes. Then she got up. She packed Callum's lunch for the next day. She slipped a note inside, tucked between the apple and the sandwich. It read, "You are my favorite person, Aunt M." She did this every single day for 12 years. She never missed once. When Callum was 14 years old, Margot finally cleaned out the storage unit. She had been paying $19 a month for 11 years to keep it. Noel's things, boxes labeled in her sister's handwriting, kitchen miscellaneous, books, winter clothes, baby stuff. Margot had not been able to open them. But the storage company was raising the price to $29, and $29 was the difference between groceries and not groceries. Callum helped. He was tall for 14, already broad in the shoulders, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's jaw. He carried boxes to Margot's car without complaint. He did not ask questions about the contents. He had learned early that some boxes were not meant to be opened in public. But in the car, on the drive home, one box shifted. The tape had yellowed and cracked. A leather journal slid out and landed on the floor near his feet. He picked it up. The cover was soft, worn, the color of cinnamon. On the first page, in handwriting that looked like his own, but more careful, more deliberate, were the words, Noel's pregnancy journal, for baby. He opened it. The entries were dated, written in blue ink. Some pages had water stains that might have been tears or might have been tea. It was impossible to tell. June 15th, 8 weeks along. I told Garrett tonight. He smiled, but his eyes did not change. I am probably reading too much into it. He is just stressed about the merger. August 3rd, he missed the ultrasound. Again. Sloan called the house asking for him. Said it was about a property deal, but she called his personal line, not his office. I need to stop being paranoid. September 20th, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket. The Four Seasons, dinner for two. He told me he was in Chicago. The receipt was local. I held it in my hand for 20 minutes. Then I put it back. I do not know why I put it back. October 30th, I asked him directly. Are you seeing someone? He laughed. Actually laughed. Called me hormonal. Maybe I am. Maybe pregnancy brain is real, and I am imagining things. But I know what I saw. November 8th. 9 days before the hemorrhage. 9 days before everything ended. I am not crazy. I am not hormonal. I found the hotel charges on the credit card statement, 6 different dates. All nights, he said he was working late. I love him, but I do not trust him anymore. And I am terrified, not of him leaving, but of being alone with this baby. What kind of mother is terrified of her own future? Callum sat on the floor of the storage unit for 2 hours. He read every entry, some of them twice. The concrete was cold beneath him. Dust floated in the yellow light from the bare bulb overhead. Somewhere, outside, a car alarm went off and stopped. A dog barked. The world continued. Margot found him sitting there, the journal open in his lap, his eyes red but dry. He looked up at her, and in that moment he looked so much like Noel that it knocked the breath from Margot's chest. She knew, he said. His voice was flat. Not angry yet. That would come later. Just flat. She knew, and she stayed because of me. Margot knelt beside him. She did not reach for the diary. She did not try to explain or soften or redirect. Your mother loved you more than she feared being alone, she said. That is the bravest thing I have ever witnessed. The next 3 months were difficult. Callum became withdrawn. His grades dropped from A's to C's. He stopped raising his hand in class. His teachers sent notes home. Margot attended every conference, sitting in chairs designed for children, listening to adults describe a boy she recognized perfectly because she had watched the same darkness settle over Noel. He got into a fight at school. A kid named Brad something made a joke about deadbeat dads. Not aimed at Callum, just a throwaway line during lunch. But Callum heard it, and something inside him snapped like a branch in winter. He shoved Brad into the lockers. Tucker was beside him before the second shove, not to fight, to stand between them. The principal suspended both boys. Tucker went willingly. In the car on the way home, Tucker said, "We got suspended as a team. That is basically friendship goals." Callum almost smiled. Almost. Margot took him to a therapist, Dr. Weiss, a woman with short gray hair and a bowl of butterscotch candies on her desk. First session, Callum sat in the chair and said nothing for 55 minutes. Dr. Weiss let him. She did not push. She did not prod. She ate a butterscotch candy and graded papers like he was not even there. Second session, he brought the diary. "I need you to read this," he said, "so that when I talk, you will understand." Dr. Weiss read it. She did not cry. But she set it down very carefully when she was finished, the way you set down something that might break. "Tell me what you are feeling," she said. "I am feeling like my father murdered my mother," Callum said. Slowly, over 3 years, and nobody charged him with anything. The anger did not explode. It crystallized. Callum began researching his father. Not in rage, in silence. He went to the public library after school and pulled up every article, every profile, every magazine cover. Forbes, Business Insider, the Society pages, Garrett Whitfield, visionary, philanthropist, self-made billionaire, a man who donated to children's hospitals and cut the ribbon at affordable housing projects that he would later sell to luxury developers. And there, in every photograph, the family, Sloane in silk, Preston in a private school blazer, the Connecticut estate, the yacht, the foundation with Garrett's name on it. Family man. That was what the caption said. Garrett Whitfield, devoted family man. Callum stared at those 2 words until they blurred. He closed the laptop. He walked home. He climbed into bed. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and listened to the dry cleaner's machines below. The rhythmic whoosh and press, whoosh and press. He matched his breathing to it. In, out, in, out. At 2 in the morning, he opened his laptop again. He typed into the search bar, Can you sue your father for abandonment? He stared at the results for 10 minutes. Then he deleted the search. He typed instead, how to get a full scholarship. He read until dawn. 2 years passed. Callum turned 16. He was quiet now in a way that made adults uncomfortable. Not sullen, not defiant, just contained, like a river running deep beneath ice. He worked at a hardware store after school, stocked shelves, cut keys, learned the names of drill bits and wood screws, and the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead. The owner, a retired Marine named Gill, paid him $9 an hour and never asked personal questions. Callum appreciated that more than the paycheck. On a Thursday in October, a letter arrived at Margot's apartment. It was addressed to Callum Whitfield. The return address was a law firm, Garrett's law firm. Callum opened it at the kitchen table while Margot watched. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down and slid it across the table to her. The letter was polite, professional. It said that Garrett Whitfield wished to establish a trust fund in the amount of $500,000 for his son. The funds would be accessible upon Callum's 18th birthday. There was one condition. Callum would legally change his last name, drop Whitfield, choose anything else, a Carver, perhaps, or something entirely new. He was to become invisible, erased from the Whitfield legacy like a line of text deleted from a document. The letter was signed by Garrett's attorney, not by Garrett. Margot read it 3 times. Her hands shook, not from fear, not from temptation, from rage. The kind of rage that builds for 16 years in a woman who works 2 jobs and packs school lunches and lies awake at night doing impossible math, all while the man responsible sleeps in Egyptian cotton sheets in a house with 17 rooms. She set the letter down. She pressed her palms flat against the table. She looked at Callum. "This is your decision," she said. Her voice was steady, barely. $500,000 is life-changing money. I will not pretend it is not. But I want you to understand what he is buying. He is not giving you money. He is buying your name. He is buying your mother's name. He is buying silence. Callum stared at the letter for a long time. He thought about $500,000. He thought about Margot's car with the dent she could not afford to fix. He thought about the medical bills that still arrived every month like clockwork, 18 years later. He thought about the scholarship he needed and the gap he could not close. Then he thought about his mother, Noel, sitting in a hospital bed, filling out a birth certificate, writing his name, Callum, and beneath it, in the last name field, in handwriting that was shaky from blood loss and medication, the word Whitfield. She had chosen that name. She had given it to him like an inheritance, not of wealth, of identity, of belonging, of defiance. Callum picked up a pen. He turned the letter over and wrote on the back, "My name is Callum Whitfield. It was my mother's choice, and it is mine to keep." He addressed a new envelope to the law firm. He walked 6 blocks to the post office. The stamp cost 58 cents. He paid for it with quarters. The trust fund offer was withdrawn, permanently. Senior year came like a freight train. Callum had pulled his grades back up to straight A's. He scored in the 98th percentile on his entrance exams. His teachers wrote recommendation letters that used words like exceptional and extraordinary determination and once-in-a-generation mind. He was accepted to a top university, full academic scholarship, almost full. There was a gap, $4,000. Fees, housing deposit, books, $4,000 that might as well have been $4 million. He did not tell Margot. She had already given him everything she had. Asking for more would be like asking a woman with no blood left to bleed again. He considered, for one terrible night calling Garrett. He sat on the edge of his bed with his phone in his hand. He dialed 6 digits of a number he had memorized years ago from the business magazine. Then he hung up. He went to the roof of the apartment building. It was November. Cold. The city glittered below like a circuit board. He sat on the ledge, not to jump. He was not going to jump. He just needed to feel something that was not rage or grief, just the wind, just the cold, just the honest, indifferent night air. Tucker found him. Tucker always found him. He had a radar for Callum's worst moments, a sixth sense built from 10 years of friendship and 3 shared suspensions. Tucker sat beside him, did not ask what he was doing up there, did not say anything for a while. They watched the traffic below, headlights and taillights, people going places. My dad said he will cover the $4,000, Tucker said. Casual, like he was talking about splitting a pizza. You can pay him back whenever. He said whenever means never, by the way. Callum closed his eyes. The wind pushed against his face. I cannot take that, he said. Yeah, you can. He already called the admissions office. It is done. He said to tell you, and I am quoting here, Callum Whitfield is the best kid I know other than my own, and if his good-for-nothing father will not pay for college, then I will, and I do not want to hear another word about it. Callum opened his eyes. He looked at Tucker. Tucker was grinning the same gap-toothed grin he had at 10 years old, holding out half a sandwich. Your dad is a good man, Callum said. I know, Tucker said. He is a plumber. He fixes things. It is what he does. They sat on that rooftop until dawn. They did not talk about fathers. They talked about nothing. College. Whether cereal qualified as soup. The neighbor's cat that kept getting into the building through a vent no one could find. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of conversation that holds you together when you did not realize you were falling apart. Before leaving for college, Callum did one thing. He tracked down Dr. Ruth Callaway. It was not easy. She had retired from the hospital 5 years earlier. No forwarding address, no social media. Callum found her through the hospital's alumni records office after calling 7 different departments and being transferred 11 times. She lived in a small house in a town 2 hours north of the city. The house had a green door and more plants than furniture. Ferns in the windows, succulents on every surface. A tomato plant on the front porch that had seen better days. She opened the door and looked at him for a long time. You look like your mother, she said. I know, he said. She made tea, Earl Grey. The cups were mismatched. One had a chip on the rim. The kitchen smelled like basil and old books. Dr. Callaway was in her 60s now. Her hands were steady, but slower. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat across from him at a small table by the window and studied him the way she must have studied patients, with attention, with care, with the quiet certainty of someone who has seen both the best and worst of what human beings are capable of. I remember everything about that night, she said. A doctor never forgets the ones that almost go wrong. She told him the medical facts, the placental abruption, the blood loss, the emergency surgery. She told him what the records showed. Your mother's hemorrhage was survivable with immediate intervention, she said. The key was time. She called your father first, 3 times. If she had called 911 immediately, instead of spending those minutes trying to reach him, she would have had 8 more minutes of response time, 8 minutes less blood loss, 8 fewer minutes of oxygen deprivation to her heart. She paused, sipped her tea, set the cup down carefully. Those 8 minutes did not kill her that night, but they caused the damage that her heart could never recover from. The cardiomyopathy, the weakness, the gradual decline. The implications settled over Callum like a stone sinking through water. His mother's trust in Garrett. Her instinct to call her husband first, the most natural thing in the world. Call the person you love when you are afraid. And that instinct, that love, that trust had cost her the years she should have had. She did not die because Garrett left. She died because she loved him enough to call him first. Callum sat very still. The tea grew cold in his hands. Dr. Callaway reached into the drawer beside her chair. She pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was yellowed with age. The handwriting on the front was familiar. He had seen it in the diary. Callum. Your mother gave me this during her last hospital stay, Dr. Callaway said. She asked me to hold it until you turned 18. I have kept it in that drawer for 15 years. I checked on it every Sunday. I do not know why I checked on Sundays specifically. It just felt right. She handed it to him. I will give you some privacy, she said, and left the room. Callum opened the envelope. His hands were steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper, lined, torn from a notebook. The handwriting was shakier than in the diary. The pen had pressed hard in some places and barely touched in others. My beautiful boy, if you are reading this, I did not make it, but you did, and that means I won. I want you to know some things, not the sad things. You already know the sad things, or you will. I want you to know the good things. You were planned. You were wanted. You were loved before you had a name. I felt you move for the first time on a Tuesday, and I cried so hard the woman at the grocery store thought something was wrong. I said no. Everything is right. For the first time in months, everything is right. Your father was not always the man he became. Or maybe he was, and I did not want to see it. It does not matter now. What matters is you. I named you Callum because it means dove. Peace. I wanted your name to be the thing I wished for you most. I need you to know this. I am not angry at him. I am sad. There is a difference. Anger is a fire that burns the person holding it. Sadness is water. It passes through you and leaves you cleaner than before. Do not carry anger for me. Do not waste your beautiful life trying to make him sorry. He will make himself sorry eventually. That is how it works. Be the man he could not be, not for revenge, for yourself. Love is not what you receive, Callum. Love is what you choose to give, even when you have been given nothing. I love you. I loved you before you took your first breath. I will love you after I take my last. Be good. Be brave. Be kind. Your mother. Callum read it 4 times. Each time, different words surfaced. Planned, wanted, loved, dove, peace, choose. He folded the letter along its original creases. He placed it in his jacket pocket, the left side, over his heart. He would carry it there for the next 7 years. Through college, through his first job, through late nights and early mornings, and every single moment when the weight of his history threatened to crush him. Dr. Callaway came back into the kitchen. She did not ask what the letter said. She poured more tea. They sat together in the quiet, and the ferns breathed in the window, and somewhere outside, a bird was singing the kind of song that does not know anything about sorrow. She would be so proud of you, Dr. Callaway said. I know, Callum said, and for the first time, he meant it. College was not a chapter in Callum's life. It was a door. On one side, the apartment above the dry cleaner, the unpaid bills, the silence where a father should have been. On the other side, possibility. He worked 3 campus jobs, dining hall in the morning, library in the afternoon, security desk at night. He slept 5 hours. He studied in the gaps between shifts, reading textbooks on the bus, reviewing notes during slow hours at the security desk when the building was empty, and the fluorescent lights hummed like a meditation. He made the dean's list every semester. Not because he was naturally gifted, though he was. Because failure was not something he could afford. Literally, his scholarship depended on his grades. Without it, the door would close. Sophomore year, he started a business with Tucker. Tucker had followed him to the same school, different major, same cafeteria. They had been inseparable since career day, and college did not change that. The business was small. Property management. They managed student housing units that landlords neglected. Leaky faucets, broken heaters, mold in the bathrooms. Tucker, whose father had taught him plumbing and basic construction, did the repairs. Callum handled the books, the tenants, the negotiations with landlords who did not want to spend money on buildings they had already profited from. They called the company Whitfield Brennan Properties. Tucker insisted on Callum's name going first. Alphabetical order, he said, but they both knew it was more than that. By the end of sophomore year, they managed 4 buildings. By junior year, 12. Callum met Darcy Emerson in an economics lecture on a Wednesday morning in October. She was sitting 3 rows ahead of him, taking notes in green ink. She had brown hair that she kept tucking behind her ear. Every time it fell forward, she pushed it back. Every time she pushed it back, it fell forward again. It was a cycle that Callum found, for reasons he could not explain, hypnotic. After class, he introduced himself. "I am Callum," he said. "I know," she said. "You are the one who always answers the professor's questions like you actually read the material." "I do actually read the material. That is what makes it annoying," she said and smiled. Darcy was from a small town in Virginia. Her father was a carpenter. Her mother ran the public library. She had no interest in money or status or the social hierarchies that organized campus life like invisible fences. She was warm and direct and completely unimpressed by anything that could not be earned. Their first date was at a food truck near the engineering building. Tacos, she paid because he forgot his wallet. Genuinely forgot. Not as a move. He was embarrassed. She laughed. "You can buy next time," she said. Assuming there is a next time. There was a next time, and another, and another. He told her about his father gradually, not all at once, in pieces, the way you reveal a wound slowly, so the other person can decide if they want to stay. The night he told her everything, they were walking back from a late movie, a comedy he did not remember the title of. The sidewalk was empty. The streetlights cast orange circles on the pavement. He just started talking about Noel, about the phone call, about the bathroom floor and the blood and the woman's voice on the phone saying call back tomorrow, about the hospital, the papers, the insurance, Margot, the diary, the trust fund, the letter on his heart. He talked for an hour, maybe longer. Darcy walked beside him and did not interrupt. Not once. She did not gasp or cry or reach for his hand. She just listened with her whole body, the way you listen to a song that matters. When he finished, they stood at the edge of campus. The clock tower read 11:43. "I do not feel sorry for you," Darcy said. He looked at her. "I feel proud of you," she said. "There is a difference." He fell in love with her in that exact moment, standing under a streetlight at 11:43 on a Thursday night, with taco sauce still on his jacket and his entire history laid bare at her feet. He fell in love. After graduation, Callum and Tucker expanded the business, but Callum chose a direction that surprised everyone who knew his father's empire. Affordable housing, not luxury condos, not glass towers with lobbies that smelled like eucalyptus. Buildings where families could live, where single mothers could afford the rent, where children could grow up with a roof that did not leak and a radiator that worked, and a landlord who answered the phone when something broke. The work was hard. The margins were thin, but Callum was not building a fortune. He was building a counterpoint. Every building he renovated, was a quiet argument against everything his father stood for. By 23, his company had renovated 12 buildings, housed over 400 families. By 25, his net worth was modest by billionaire standards, but it was real, self-made, clean. A business journal published a feature, The Whitfield Who Built Different. The article mentioned his background carefully. Orphaned, raised by his aunt, same last name as the billionaire real estate mogul. The journalist did not draw the connection explicitly, but the industry talked. Garrett saw the article. Of course he did. And for the first time in 25 years, he picked up the phone. Callum's phone rang at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He was at a job site, sawdust in his hair, a blueprint in one hand. He looked at the caller ID, a number he had memorized at 12 years old and never called. He let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. On the 5th ring, he answered. Callum? Garrett's voice was smooth, polished, the voice of a man who had practiced this call in his head. I have been following your career with great pride. Great pride. The words landed like coins on marble, hollow, bright, meaningless. Garrett continued. He spoke about partnership, resources, a corner office in the Whitfield building downtown. He spoke about legacy and family and bringing 2 generations together. Callum listened to every word. He did not interrupt. When Garrett finished, Callum said, I appreciate the call, but I have a question first. Of course, Garrett said. What was my mother's favorite flower? Silence. Not the dramatic kind. Not a pause for effect. Real silence. The silence of a man searching his memory and finding nothing. 5 seconds. 10. It was gardenia, Callum said. She grew them on the balcony of the penthouse. You walked past them every single day for 3 years, and you never once asked what they were. He hung up. Set the phone on the blueprint, picked up his hard hat, went back to work. He proposed to Darcy 6 months later, on a rooftop. The rooftop, the same building where Tucker had once found him sitting on a ledge in November. The building that Callum had purchased 2 years earlier and renovated into 24 affordable apartments. There was a garden on the roof now, community space, benches and raised beds and string lights that glowed amber at dusk, and gardenias, a whole row of them along the south wall. White petals, thick, sweet fragrance, the same flowers his mother had grown on a balcony she would never see again. He knelt on one knee. The ring was small. Ring was a vintage setting with a pearl. It had belonged to Noel. Margot had kept it for 22 years, wrapped in tissue paper in a box marked, for Callum when he is ready. I do not have a speech, he said. I just know I want to spend every morning waking up next to you and every night falling asleep knowing you are there. Get up, Darcy said. She was crying and laughing. Get up and put it on my finger. He did. While Darcy called her parents from the other side of the roof, her voice bright and breathless and full of joy, Callum stood alone among the gardenias. The city hummed below. The sky was turning the color of peach skin. He pressed his hand to his left jacket pocket. The letter crinkled under his palm. I became the man you hoped I would be, Mom. Not because of him, in spite of him. The Grand Belmont Hotel. The wedding. The present. Callum had been speaking for 20 minutes. The dessert course sat untouched. Wine glasses were full and forgotten. The string quartet had laid their instruments in their laps. 400 people were barely breathing. Every word Callum had spoken was true. Every detail verified. Every date confirmed. He had not embellished. He had not raised his voice. He had stood at the head table with his mother's gardenia on his lapel and told the simple, devastating truth about the man sitting at table 3. And now he reached the part they had all been waiting for without knowing they were waiting. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket, the left side, over his heart. The paper was soft, creased along old lines. The edges were worn smooth from 7 years of carrying. My mother wrote this from her hospital bed, Callum said. She was 28 years old. She knew her heart was failing. She sealed it in an envelope and gave it to the doctor who saved our lives, with instructions to give it to me when I turned 18. He unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. Darcy's hand was on his knee. Tucker stood behind him, solid as a wall. I will not read all of it. Most of it is mine, between me and her, but there is one part I want you to hear. He took a breath. The room was so quiet that the candle flames leaned in to listen. She wrote this. Her words, not mine. He read, "Be the man he could not be, not for revenge, for yourself. Love is not what you receive, Callum. Love is what you choose to give, even when you have been given nothing." He lowered the letter. 400 people sat in the wreckage of those words. At table 3, Garrett Whitfield's face had gone gray, not red with embarrassment, not white with anger, gray. The color of something that has stopped working. The color of a man watching his legacy disintegrate in real time, one sentence at a time, in front of every person he has ever tried to impress. Sloane sat beside him. She was crying, quiet tears that tracked through her makeup and fell onto her silk dress. She was not crying for sympathy. She was crying because she remembered. Room 1112. The phone ringing. Your wife called 3 times. She said, "Call back tomorrow," and hung up. And she had lived with that sentence for 25 years, buried under Garrett's money and Garrett's name and the beautiful lie they had built together. Vivian Whitfield, the matriarch, sat in her wheelchair at the edge of table 2. She gripped the arm rests. Her knuckles were white. She had known. She had always known. She had helped cover it up, written checks to keep people quiet, made phone calls, managed the narrative. And now the narrative was being unmade by the grandson she had abandoned along with his mother. Preston Whitfield stood up. Nobody noticed at first. He was at table 3 beside his mother. He was 24 years old. Sandy hair, quiet eyes. He had lived his entire life in his father's shadow, wearing his father's name like an overcoat 2 sizes too large. He had met Callum exactly twice before this night. Awkward lunches arranged by Viven in restaurants where the menus had no prices. He stood up and he walked across the ballroom, past the dance floor, past the cake, past the tables of people who turned to watch him move with the slow, deliberate steps of someone crossing a bridge they cannot uncross. He stopped at the family table. He pulled out the empty chair beside Margot. The chair that had been reserved for no one. The chair next to the framed photograph of Noel, 25 years old, hand on her belly, smiling at someone just outside the frame. Preston sat down. Margot looked at him. He looked at her. Neither spoke. But something passed between them, a recognition, a choice, the quiet, irreversible act of choosing a side. Callum watched his half-brother sit down at the family table, and something shifted in his chest, a loosening, a release, like a fist that had been clenched for 25 years finally opening. He turned back to the room. His voice changed. The edge softened. The steel remained, but it was wrapped in something warmer now, something that sounded like the voice of a man who has decided to stop fighting and start living. "I did not tell you this story to humiliate my father," he said. "I know that is what it sounds like, but it is not." He paused. I told you because I want you to understand what this wedding means to me. I am not just marrying Darcy. I am choosing a different life. I am choosing to be present, to show up, to answer the phone at 9:42 at night, every night, for the rest of my life. He turned to Darcy. Her mascara was ruined, two dark rivers running down her cheeks. She did not care. Darcy, he said, you taught me something I did not know I needed to learn. You taught me that the opposite of abandonment is not just staying. It is choosing every single day. He looked at her. Only at her. 400 people disappeared. I choose you today. Tomorrow, when it is easy and when it is hard, when you call at 9:42 and I am tired or busy or scared, I will answer every time. Darcy stood up. She wrapped her arms around him. The microphone picked up the sound of her voice against his shoulder. She said 3 words. They were not "I love you." They were "I know you will." The room stood. Not all at once, Darcy first, then Margot, pressing both hands to the table to push herself upright, her altered navy dress trembling with the effort. Then Tucker, who had been standing behind Callum the entire time, arms crossed, a man guarding a door that no longer needed guarding. Then the room, table by table, like a wave moving outward from the center. 400 people rose to their feet. Some were crying, some were not. All of them were standing, all except Garrett. He sat at table 3, alone. Sloane had turned her chair away from him. His whiskey glass was empty. The Rolex in his pocket had stopped ticking, though he would not discover that until later. He did not stand because his legs would not support him. Not physically, existentially. The weight of 400 people, knowing the truth, had settled onto his shoulders like concrete, and he could not rise beneath it. Every woman in that ballroom was thinking the same thing. She could feel it, the thought that did not need to be spoken because it lived in the body, in the chest, in the space between hope and memory. I would give anything to hear those words from someone who meant them. Every man in that room was asking himself a question he might never answer honestly. Am I the man who answers the phone? The reception continued, because that is what receptions do. The band played, people danced, the cake was cut and distributed in neat squares on china plates. Darcy and Callum had their first dance to a song that Callum had chosen, one of Noel's favorites, a slow ballad from the 80s that Margot used to hum while doing the dishes. Tucker gave his best man speech. It was short. It was funny. It mentioned the rooftop and the plumber and the time Callum accidentally stapled his own thumb during a renovation and pretended nothing happened for 45 minutes. You are the toughest person I know, Tucker said, and the best. And if you ever sit on another ledge without calling me first, I will kill you myself. The room laughed. Callum laughed. It felt good, clean, like rain after a long dry season. At 11:15, Garrett found Callum on the terrace. The terrace overlooked the hotel gardens. Below, pathways wound through hedgerows and fountain basins. The air smelled like late summer, like cut grass, and chlorine from the pool, and something else, sweet, familiar gardenias. The hotel gardener had planted them along the south wall. Callum had not requested this. It was coincidence. Or it was not. Garrett stood in the doorway. His tie was loosened. His jacket was unbuttoned. He looked smaller than he had that morning, not thinner, smaller, as if the speech had compressed him, squeezed out the air that had been holding his shape. You destroyed me in there, Garrett said. Callum did not turn around. He stood at the railing, looking at the garden below. No, he said. You destroyed yourself 25 years ago. I just told people about it. Garrett stepped onto the terrace. His shoes were loud on the stone. "I was young," he said. "I made a terrible mistake." Callum turned then. He looked at his father, not with hate, not with the cold fury that had carried him through his teenage years and into adulthood. He looked at Garrett the way you look at a building that has been condemned, with acknowledgement, with finality. "You were 30 years old," Callum said. "You had a law degree, a company, and a pregnant wife. You were not young, you were selfish. There is a difference." The gardenias released their scent in the night air, sweet and heavy, the smell of Noel's balcony, the smell of the rooftop garden, the smell of memory. "What do you want from me?" Garrett asked. "Nothing," Callum said. "That is what you never understood. I have not wanted anything from you since I was 12 years old, and you returned my letter unopened. I wanted you to hear the truth, in front of everyone who thinks you are a great man, because my mother deserved that, and now she has it." Garrett was quiet for a long time. The fountain below made soft, continuous sounds. Water falling, water rising, water falling again. "Can we start over?" he said. Callum studied his father. For the first time, he did not see a villain. He did not see a billionaire or a monster, or the man who had left his mother to bleed on a bathroom floor. He saw a small man, a diminished man, standing in a garden he did not plant, surrounded by flowers he could not name, asking for something he had not earned. "No," Callum said. "We cannot start over. You cannot unbreak what you broke. You cannot unsend that letter. You cannot bring my mother back, or give me a childhood, or undo the look on Margot's face every time the math did not work." He paused. "But I will leave the door unlocked. Whether you walk through it is up to you. And Dad." The word hung between them. Dad. Callum had not called him that since he was 6 years old. "If you ever do walk through that door, learn her flower first." Callum went back inside, to his wife, to his aunt, to his brother, Preston, who was learning Margot's name and laughing at something Tucker had said about plumbing being the most noble profession in America. The rest of the night unfolded the way wedding nights do, slowly, sweetly, with the particular tenderness that comes when people have just witnessed something true. Garrett and Sloane left the reception at 11:45, early. In the car, the leather seats cool, the city passing outside the tinted windows, Sloane spoke first. "He is right about everything," she said. "You know that?" Garrett stared out the window. Street lights slid across his face. Light, shadow, light, shadow. For the first time in 25 years, he had no answer, no deflection, no minimization, no counter-argument, just silence and the faint smell of gardenias that had somehow followed him into the car. Preston and Callum exchanged phone numbers at midnight, real numbers, not through assistants or lawyers. Preston typed his in himself, his fingers clumsy on the screen, and Callum did the same. "I want to see the buildings you have renovated," Preston said. "I will give you the tour," Callum replied. "Bring work clothes." "I do not own work clothes." "Then that is the first thing we will fix." They stood in the hallway outside the ballroom, two brothers who shared a father and nothing else, and for the first time, that felt like it might be enough. Margot danced. For the first time in her life, at a formal event, in a navy dress she had altered 3 times, Margot Carver danced. Tucker's father asked her. He had driven 4 hours to attend the wedding. He was 62 years old, with gray hair, and hands that knew the weight of wrenches and the feel of a copper pipe. "I am not a good dancer," Margot said. "Neither am I," he said. "We will be terrible together." They danced to a slow song. Something about moonlight, something Margot would not remember the title of, but would remember the feeling of for the rest of her life. The feeling of being held by someone gentle after 25 years of holding everything together alone. Tucker watched from the bar. He nudged Callum. "Our parents are dancing," he said. "Your father and my aunt," Callum corrected. "Same thing," Tucker said. Vivian Whitfield wheeled herself to Callum before leaving. She was 78 years old. Her pearls were real. Her guilt was real too, and it showed in the way her hand shook when she reached for his. She gripped his fingers, tight, tighter than a woman her age should have been able to. She said nothing, but her eyes said everything. "I knew. I am sorry. It is too late. It is not enough." Callum looked at her for a long moment. He did not forgive her. Forgiveness was not something he owed anyone. But he covered her hand with his and held it for 3 seconds before letting go. It was not absolution. It was acknowledgement. "I see you. I know what you did, and I am not going to let it consume me." Vivienne nodded. A single small movement. Then she wheeled herself away, into the lobby, into the car, into the long silence of a woman who had chosen power over love, and was now discovering that power cannot hold your hand at midnight. The next morning. The honeymoon suite at the Grand Belmont. Early light. The curtains were sheer, ivory. The sunlight came through them, like water through gauze. Darcy was still asleep, curled on her side, one hand under the pillow, her hair spread across the white sheets like a dark river. She breathed softly, evenly, the kind of breathing that sounds like trust. Callum stood by the window. He wore a white shirt, unbuttoned. His feet were bare on the cold floor. In his hand, worn soft from 7 years of carrying, was his mother's letter. He read the last line again. "Love is not what you receive. Love is what you choose to give, even when you have been given nothing." He looked at Darcy, at the way the light touched her shoulder, at the rise and fall of her breathing, at the ring on her finger, Noel's ring, catching the early sun and sending small diamonds of light across the ceiling. This was what his mother had wished for him. Not revenge, not justice, not even vindication. This, a quiet morning, a sleeping wife, a heart that had been broken and mended and broken again and was now finally full. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text message from Preston. 7:32 in the morning, the first day of the rest of everything. The message read, "Gardenias." Her favorite was gardenias. I looked it up. Callum stared at the screen. He stared at it for a long time. The letters blurred and sharpened and blurred again. Then he smiled. A real smile. The kind that starts in the chest and rises through the throat and reaches the eyes before it reaches the lips. He typed back, "Welcome to the family." He put the phone down. He put the letter back in his pocket, left side, over his heart. He walked back to the bed. He lay down beside Darcy. She stirred, reached for his hand without opening her eyes. "What time is it?" she murmured. "Early," he said. "Go back to sleep." "Okay," she said. "Stay." "I am not going anywhere," he said, and he meant it. Not just today, not just tomorrow, every day after, every phone call, every 3 a.m., every moment that mattered, and every moment that did not. He would be there. Because that is what love looks like. Not grand gestures, not speeches in front of 400 people, not even gardens on rooftops or letters carried over hearts. Love is answering the phone at 9:42 at night. Love is staying. Outside the window, the city was waking up. Garbage trucks, taxi horns, a jogger, a woman walking a small dog that refused to walk in a straight line. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. The soundtrack of a world that does not know or care about billionaires, or abandoned wives or letters returned to cinder. But in one room, on one morning, on the first day of a marriage, a man lay beside the woman he had chosen, with his mother's words against his heart and his brother's message on his phone. And he understood, finally completely, the thing Noel had known all along. The prison door had been unlocked the whole time. He had been his own warden. And last night, in front of 400 people and one broken man, he had turned the key. He was free. Not from Garrett, not from the past, not from the memory of a woman named Noel, who had died too young in an apartment above a dry cleaner, surrounded by love, but not enough medicine. Free from the need for it to be different. Free from the question he had carried since he was 12 years old, scrawled in pencil, on lined notebook paper, and mailed with a 55-cent stamp. Why did you not want me? He did not need the answer anymore. He had Darcy. He had Margot. He had Tucker and his father, the plumber. He had Preston, who was already learning the names of flowers. He had 12 buildings full of families who slept soundly because someone had cared enough to fix the leaks and patch the walls and answer the phone when something broke. He had his mother's letter. He had his mother's name. And he had this morning. Quiet, simple, full. My name is Callum Whitfield. My mother chose that name. And last night, in front of 400 people and one broken man, I finally understood why. Not because of who my father was, but because of who she believed I could be. Closing disclaimer, this content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling and life lessons to our audience. Thank you for being part of this journey with us.